what people are looking for is a seamless experience. They're looking for high uptime. They're looking for integration of that EV experience.
You're listening to the Future of Convenience podcast, brought to you by Global Convenience Store Focus, featuring senior retail executives and experts in the global convenience, fuels, and mobility retail industry. Hosted by Dan Munford, Nick Scherzer, and Carolyn Schnare. Welcome to the Future of Convenience podcast. I'm Carolyn Schnare, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dan Munford. How you doing, Dan?
Hey, Carolyn. I'm good.
Well, it's really good to be with you today. And today we're going to talk about electric vehicles and mobility, which is a huge passion of yours. Anybody that follows you on LinkedIn knows this is right up your alley. And so why don't you tell us who we're going to talk to today?
Well, absolutely. Just before I do that, I am in danger of being a bit passionate about this topic. That's definitely true. And that's the future of mobility. I guess the world's on an energy transition, and part of that process. And I think we're starting to move the needle a bit here in terms of making the world, our industry, aware of what's happening out there. Part of that process is to provide the EV driver with somewhere safe, somewhere efficient, somewhere maybe even interesting to charge on the go. And looking at the future, I guess, it became very clear to us in the last few years that this was not just about the high power charger. This was also about what goes with it. What's the overall customer experience like? And that led us to launch in December the best EV hub in the world competition, together with Vontier's support, very significant support from them, and also sponsored by Visa and Coca-Cola. We couldn't have done this without that support from those very big global brands. We launched it, and the goal was to find the best practice sites that roadside retailers and CPOs were building around the world. And yeah, I think we've got there. I mean, we've got 24 entries from Norway, Sweden, Finland, Germany, China, a lot, and also the US and the UK. So, it's pretty exciting. And all these profiles are online. It's a library for the best EV hubs around the world, in terms of looking at what's going on. And, just to bring it back to today, we're honored to be joined by one of our great competition supporters. That's Mark Morelli, President and CEO of Vontier. Welcome, Mark.
Dan, I am so happy to be here. This is an awesome subject. It's right up our alley, and really happy to have a conversation today.
Thank you, Mark. Now, of course, we launched this competition to search for a winner, but also to allow as many people as possible to share what they were doing. And I know Vontier is working very actively on this topic. We're going to have an interesting conversation today, but just before we do that, can you tell us a bit about why you were interested in the competition?
Absolutely. So this is a key part of what we do. So for those of you not familiar with Vontier, we are touching people's lives every day. We provide critical technologies for the mobility ecosystem. And pretty much every day people interact with our products. It's about smart, sustainable solutions that keep vehicles and operations moving smoothly, safely, and more sustainably.
And tell us about your role at Vontier, Mark. In terms of where that takes you around the world. Because I mean, you were joking. I'm a bit of a traveler. I think you're a bit of a traveler too, aren't you?
Absolutely. Well, I have the pleasure of leading Vontier. It's a public company. And, as we go around the world, what's so exciting to me is that we believe in this multi-fuel future. Not only are we a leader in retail fueling and fleet fueling, but it really touches the entire multi-fuel. It's about EV charging, EV energy management. It's about compressed natural gas, renewable natural gas, hydrogen. We're also in the car wash technologies and auto repair, fleet management, point of sale systems for convenience stores. So when we're talking about these mobility hubs, whether it be along the highway, whether it be for fleets or whether in urban areas, I mean, this is so central to what we do that it's, traveling around the world and seeing how this is evolving and the future of mobility. It's just a very exciting time. There's a ton of investment going in and so many really interesting changes that are really central to all of our businesses.
So, Mark, obviously, that we can see that Vontier are very, very involved in this, I guess, providing the right services and products for roadside retailers as they manage this mobility transition. What about the best EV hub competition? I mean, are you excited about that?
Absolutely. I mean, this and seeing the applications here, you've got 24 outstanding sites that show not only how they're being more accessible to consumers, but also how they're tackling some of these challenges on complexity and production and offering venues that they're able to manage. It's just a really, really exciting time. The other interesting thing too is for us, about half of these applicants that are submitting have significant content of our products already. So for us, it's also a tremendous learning opportunity because folks are all looking at these different venues and they're trying to figure things out. And these are just outstanding examples. So I'm very excited to be part of this.
Mark, to that point, I mean, here in the U.S., EV adoption is kind of probably maybe it's a little slower than a lot of places in the world. We're getting there. We're trying. We'll get there eventually. But you've traveled a lot. You work with a lot of customers around the globe. What are some of the regions where you've seen it done really well?
I think it's not lost on folks that battery electric vehicles or EV sales in China lead the world with about 0.25% of all sales. We know Europe is about 16%, and the U.S. is trailing behind at 8%. But even our experience in the U.S. can be very different depending on where you live in the U.S. Very different in California or Colorado or New Jersey versus places in the Midwest or the South. So we see a real difference in adoption rates, and as Dan knows quite well, we've spent time together in Norway, and the reason why we spend time together in Norway is that in the last couple of years, their public charging infrastructure or high-speed chargers has grown from about 3,000 to about 7,000. And now about 90% of all vehicles that are being sold are electric vehicles, which is truly amazing. And they got there through subsidies. But I think there's tremendous learning by spending time in the mobility ecosystem to see how these mobility hubs are evolving, how the venues are evolving for consumers because they're obviously spending more time. And as Dan well knows here too, there are conversion rates from charging from a high-speed charger to going inside the venue and enjoying what might be there on site because you have more waiting time and also having a more reliable experience overall. That's really central to all of this for all consumers, regardless of where they are geographically. I think they are looking for that same reliable experience and they're looking for better venues.
Oh, yeah. If it doesn't work, what's the point, right?
Exactly.
But you need that to make sure it works. So, Dan, I want to throw that same question to you. So, Mark, just so you know, whenever I'm I'm a runner, so I'll be running around, I'll see a charger somewhere. I'll just kind of come across one. I'm like, oh, Dan, I found another one. But in the meantime, Dan, in your travels, I mean, Norway obviously stands out. Are there other regions that you've seen that are really doing this well?
There are. I mean, I just make a little bit of a joke. This maybe I know you were once in the military. Mark, but time spent in reconnaissance is seldom wasted. I think that's a well-known quote, isn't it? And it applies very much to time spent in store or on site is seldom wasted. And just to echo your point about we together and also independently, we've been to different places in the world and seen different operators. I mean, in a way, I guess my overall sort of, and I've obviously seen a lot of the sites that are represented in the competition, and some that aren't. But I guess one of the kind of factors here is that some businesses are more comfortable with moving quicker and investing bigger than others, aren't they? So you'll see some businesses that are really prepared to take a long-term view of this. They take the view that this is going to happen. It's just a question of speed, and they take some board level investment decisions, some quite big decisions, and then they stick to them, and they take a long term view. Other businesses are very much playing the wait and see game. So there's that going on globally, and then of course to your points, Mark, there are certain regions. The Nordics, I guess, is not just Norway, of course, but the Sweden and Denmark, are very, have moved very aggressively into this. And in those markets, nobody's waiting to see anymore. It's everybody is competing. And, I guess one of the big lessons for this is that when we ask what would you have done differently, and that's one of our questions that we always ask, and they all say, well, we'd have liked to go bigger earlier, because boy, this can take some time. When everybody's doing it and everybody's trying to, get grid connections. This is a competitive business to get those grid connections. So there is some first mover advantage, isn't there? But the devil is in the detail, because you can't, maybe your first mover advantage is to get your grid connection and put some charges in, but maybe not all of the charges that you're going to eventually put in. So, this is a complicated business, Mark, isn't it?
It is. And, it's really interesting too, out of some of those lessons, you can certainly understand there's a big investment that is needed for the EV infrastructure, and who's going to make that investment. And you see some of the folks, that are leaders in that mobility ecosystem, they're kind of tiptoeing their way into it, like we saw in Norway. And then they say, okay, now we've got this figured out. And, we wish maybe we had gone at scale quicker. And we've also heard that feedback. And you also see a transition where people have started to leverage a charge point operator on their site, and now they're deciding to be their own charge point operator because they want that consumer experience to accrue to what they do. So you see an evolution of that thinking. And, we have an interesting vantage point, because in the Nordics, we actually have about 80% of the publicly available networks under management with our network software called Drives. And so for us, we'll serve whoever wants to be a charge point operator, but we do see an evolution of who's making that decision to want to be a charge point operator.
I think that's a really strong point. Maybe we just stay on that for a minute, because I think it's worthy of just sort of building out a bit. And I guess, just to your point, Mark, I mean, retailers like to be in control and they like to have visibility on the data, don't they? Do you think that's really driving why they're putting their brands on these chargers? Do you think that's the major motivation?
Well, I think some of that motivation is coming from, it's very competitive to be in the convenience retailing business, whether it be a mobility hub, a stop along the highway, or in your urban area. And so they're trying to attract consumers to their site, and they want to own that consumer experience. And they're also trying to look to cross fertilize. You know what? If you're making a single payment, why don't you own that consumer when they come on your site, regardless of whether they're EV charging, or, by the way, you see higher conversion into car wash, you see a higher conversion on in-store sales. And so I think they're recognizing that they do have the ability to own the entire consumer experience for that. Now, not everybody will make that decision. There might be smaller mom and pop operators that may decide that they're not going to make those investments. But we certainly see the larger, more national players, or the larger players at scale, beginning to make those decisions.
Absolutely. And I mean, I guess just on that point, even if they're not your branded chargers on your site, the customer who rolls up and has a problem with those chargers will come and talk to your staff and complain about it, and even if it hasn't got your brand on it. So you kind of that, I think that's a big motivation, isn't it? How the customer views those chargers anyway.
Yeah, I think what people are looking for is a seamless experience. Looking for high uptime. They're looking for integration of that EV experience, and maybe even into, extending that further, Dan, into the loyalty or rewards programs. I mean, these convenience retailers are really interested in those because they can be more sticky for consumers. And so they want to be able to extend that to all their offerings that they have. And so that as EV charging plays a bigger role in the stop along the highway or in your local neighborhood. And by the way, you do see, even in the Nordics, which we were talking quite a bit about for obvious reasons, but there's a high level of home charging. So people think, you know what, you're going to just charge at home. You don't need a stop. But I think what the experience in the Nordic show, at very high penetration rates of EVs on the road, that's an important part of the infrastructure that needs to exist, even though in the Nordics there's a high level of in-home charging, much like the US has a high level, of in-home charging, that on the road stop is a key part of the mobility infrastructure. And so that experience needs, is a way for people in these mobility hubs to be able to integrate with their other offerings.
Oh, for sure. And I think, we're just going to see an entirely different consumer experience down the road. I mean, you can't generally put gasoline at home in your car. So it's going to just change the mindset of people that have been doing it their entire lives and how you go places and what you do when you get there. So that's an amazing insight, of course. And now, Dan, I'm going to turn it a little bit back to the competition because you've been looking at all of these. We've all been looking at the entries that we've seen. What are some of the standouts that you've seen or some of the best practices that you've been seeing in these entries that really make them amazing?
Well, yeah, good question. I suppose I should just also think about context and the fact this is a very competitive, hard fought thing. So, I'll try and avoid mentioning individual entries. And we're in the middle, as this airs, we'll be in the middle of the voting, and of course the winner will find out they're the winner in around the beginning of May. So that's the context we're in. Very competitive. But I will say a few things. I think the exciting thing here is obviously we're looking across three categories. So we got some different kinds of sites because, we've got urban, we've got highway, and we've also got fleet. So, different commercial opportunities, very varied. So that's interesting. We've got entries in all three categories. We're delighted about that. And there's a big variety of entries here, isn't there? I mean, obviously, many of us have spent a lot of time looking at the different entries and thinking about how they're positioned, and there's a lot of differences. Some entries are very high on design and mission. Others are very well positioned as leaders in the mobility space. Others have got a foot in both camps. So there's a real variety there, and maybe what I can do is mention all the entries. So let's do that. We've got, this won't be in alphabetical order. I apologize. I haven't pre-prepared that, but we've got Neste, we've got ST1, we've got DCC Energy, Certas, we've got Motor Fuel Group, we've got Circle K, we've got Neon Marketplace, Seed and Greet, Green Station, Maxwell, GridServe, Shell, EG Group, BP, Sainsbury's, Osprey. I'm not sure there's many left that have really done exciting stuff. I think there are, I'm joking a bit because I think there are more in China we haven't got into because we didn't know them. They probably don't know us. Probably that's the more important consideration. But we do have a lot in that market. But we've got a really good representation of what's good around the world, and they're different and they're doing different things. And I don't think anybody's figured this out completely. Everyone has got a slightly different view on how fast this is going to happen. It might depend on which market they're in, but what everyone's trying to do is move towards that future, and see and try and get as much right as they can, So that would be my summary.
And you mentioned earlier, too, that they're all online, so you can see these. I mean, it's great to hear about them from us. I definitely encourage you to go to globalconvenienceStoreFocus.co.uk to really look at these, because I think the design element on a lot of these is really cool to see, too. Right, Dan?
Absolutely. Yeah. No, very much. Maybe just a question for you, Mark. Obviously, we're talking about these exciting entries. Is what we're seeing with these EV hubs revolutionary, do you think?
I think there's some complexity involved. I think, by the way, I will comment that I really like the way that you've broken this into these mobility hubs for urban, highway, and fleet. And we see some really interesting, things that are coming out of this. But one of the biggest areas to your question is, there's a lot of investment going in, and this is complex to be able to manage, everything that's going on here in these locations. And by the way, labor is always a constraint, as we know in our everyday lives, that people struggle with the labor issues. And I think, what the thing that I'd like to draw across this is there's real productivity and automation opportunities here. And one thing comes to mind to us at Vontier as we're traveling around the world and we're working with a lot of our customers is that, there's an analogy, I think, to, industry and what happened in all of the assets that were going in related to, factories and what people now call Industry 4.0, where there was this whole proliferation of smart connected devices with sensors. And we realized, through Industry 4.0 that there was an ability to connect, manage, and scale this and have more productive outcomes with tools and capabilities. And I think we're on like mobility ecosystem 2.0. And I think what we're seeing happen with all this investment going in and all this interest with how to attract consumers and how to be more productive with the challenges on all these disparate assets and this investment going in with labor challenges is that we will, approach a mobility ecosystem 4.0, where you have these smart connected devices with more tools and capability. And this is what's so interesting for us to be part of this and part of this future of the mobility ecosystem, because there's so many touch points that we have in the mobility ecosystem that there's a real opportunity for us to provide solutions to people that are making these investments and trying to manage these assets.
Absolutely. And I guess, to concur with you, Mark, really, if you look at the liquid fuel supply chain, 120 years ago, it was obviously beginning. In a way, it's still developing, isn't it? But obviously, it's a very mature value chain. If you look at the EV charging value chain, it's still early days, isn't it? But it's going to move very quickly by comparison.
It is moving quickly, and I think what it is bringing to the forefront is that there's a lot of things that are combined with it. And I think as the infrastructure goes in, that consumers are going to have more choice on where they stop. And that choice is going to be combined with other things. They want a better consumer experience. And I think we're seeing that through these excellent examples that are showing up, is that consumers do have choice of where they spend their time. They do have choice on venues. First of all, safety is a big issue, well lit and secure. And also the venues that are available to them, other services that are available to them. And many of these examples also are multi-fuel. And so having that multi-fuel future. So to us, it's tremendously exciting to see all these changings. And it's a really vibrant growth market where we are playing a major role of not just making a difference in the products and solutions, but we feel like we can change the world and make it more sustainable and a better place by being part of this. So it's really exciting to us.
My wife always laughs because I look through the number of countries that we've got with EV hubs, and I say, so, there's a lot of options for holiday destinations here.
I can't tell you how many car washes I do on holiday. So, I mean, it becomes an affliction when people don't pay attention to this, do they, Dan? I mean, they're not, you're focused on maybe the electric vehicle itself, because that's really cool and sexy, and so many new products coming to market, more than 100 in the Nordics. It's just amazing on choice. But the mobility ecosystem is going through a similar kind of revolution. And to me, that's equally as exciting.
Well, 100% agree on that. And I think, whereas the internal combustion engine vehicle you could see as a standalone product, and it doesn't necessarily, obviously you need fuel stations, but there's a very close symbiotic relationship, isn't there, between EVs and fast charging hubs, And I think, the OEMs are definitely, all very awake to the fact that their customer experience doesn't end when they drive off from their showroom. It's on the road as well. And that's why we've seen some big moves from the OEMs to get into fast charging themselves. And think about the experience that goes around it, because that is very much part of their brand.
Yeah, that is so true. And I think one of the things you're also bringing to light through this competition is what's happening on the fleet side. And, if you're a fleet operator, you're absolutely thinking about decarbonization and how am I going to face these challenges? And you're thinking about multi-fuel. You're certainly thinking about EV for sure. And how does that weigh against my other options? And so many fleet operators, I mean, it's less than 1% worldwide have decarbonized. And so are they going to do it with one OEM or have a mixed set of OEM? Are they going to do it with one, future for a decarbonization, or are they going to do a multi-fuel future? And I think what's so interesting here is that we're in such early innings of a pretty massive revolution. And there's so many exciting changes, so much investment, and so much complexity they're going to have to work through, that this productivity and automation is going to play a key role for them.
Well, absolutely, Mark. Look, this topic is so fascinating because it's so challenging, right? So it's always wonderful to talk to you about this. And I'd like to thank you for Vontier's support for the Best EV Hub in the World competition. We couldn't do it without you.
So exciting to be part of this. Thank you for having me today.
For sure. And Mark, again, thank you. It was great to see you again. Dan, as always, I know I could talk to you for hours about this, and there will be plenty of more podcasts, which we will. And this competition will go on for many, many years. It'll be interesting when we look back at this year and say, wow, remember when there was like 23 entries and now we're at 150, and we'll just have to cut it off because they'll be so just different every single year. So with that, I just wanted to say thank you all for being with us today.
Thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you. What fun. Thank you for having me.
And thank you so much for listening to the Future of Convenience podcast. You've been listening to the Future of Convenience podcast, produced by Dan Munford, Nick Scherzer, Jenna Ferguson, and Lorraine Evans. It is produced, edited, and mixed by Carolyn Schnare, and music is provided by Jukebox Music. Tune in every other Friday for new episodes, and please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Learn more at globalconveniencestorefocus.co.uk.